Hi, you guys, it's Professor Daniel, and I'm back with Chapter 9. Chapter 9 is titled The Market Revolution, and it spans about 40 years, from 1800 to 1840. Now, beware. I will, but not beware, not in a negative way, but beware. I will have some dates that are a little outside of the scope of this chapter, but they're still considered to be a part of the market revolution. And that's because the market revolution is a period of economic transformation for the United States. So if there is a technological innovation that comes slightly before 1800, I'm still going to include it in the market revolution. So what is, again, the market revolution? Glad you asked. The market revolution is a period of intense economic transformation and stimulation in the United States. And the catalyst for this market revolution were the innovations of technology, especially in transportation and communication. So we'll get the development of roads, we'll get the development of the steamboat and the railroad as well as technologies that will make instant communication possible. All of these things will have a huge impact on our society. And that's what we'll be studying mostly in this chapter. We'll be studying the technological innovations that come about during this time. And then we'll really finish by answering the question of how these technological innovations will impact the United States in the 19th century, which again is the period that we're studying. So let's continue and jump in. The market revolution represents, or a lot of the technological innovations of the market revolution represents an acceleration of developments that had already been underway during the colonial era. So one of the first developments will be the development of roads. Now, roads are important because they'll open new land to settlement and they'll lower transportation costs and make it easier for economic enterprises to sell products. That's one of the, I would say, biggest parts or it's something that's incredibly significant with these innovations in technology. It makes it a lot easier for economic enterprises to sell their products. Prior to the market revolution, if you had a company and you sold a product, let's say you have a jam company or you sell jam, because of the lack of transportation, you are pretty limited on where you could sell your products and who you could sell your products to. But with the development of the steamboat and the railroad and just regular old roads, now your products don't have to just be local products. You'll start to see the growth of national brands because of this. Because now you can put your jam on a rail or on a railroad car and have it sold all over the nation. Now, the first advance in overland transportation came with the development of turnpikes or toll roads. But one of the largest innovations of this time is the steamboat, which was invented by Robert Fulton. Steamboat was really significant because it allows you to be able to go against the current. Prior to the steamboat, you had to go in whatever direction your river was going in, which leads to the question of, how do I get back where I came from? But with the steamboat, you're able to go against the current. You're able to go upstream. So this seems like a wonderful innovation, which it was. However, steamboats are pretty unstable and they were pretty dangerous. They were prone to explosion. The deadliest steamboat explosion occurred with the explosion of the steamboat called the General Slocum, and it killed 958 people. And to show how dangerous steamboats were, between 1811 and 1851, 21% of all river accidents were due to steamboat explosions. So they didn't last very long because they were so dangerous. However, you have a lot of other things that will be developed that will help both transportation and economic enterprises. And one of these largest, I would say, innovations would be the development or completion rather of the Erie Canal. The Erie Canal was completed in 1825 and it spanned 363 miles. The Erie Canal also allowed goods to flow between the Great Lakes region and New York City. So it connects these Great Lakes regions to New York City. And because of this, it kind of gives NYC primacy over competing ports and access to trade with the Old Northwest. Now, what about the railroad? Were they significant? how does this change society? And does it really change society? The answer is yes. The railroads will be incredibly important. So for one, because of the railroads will, one, help to open new frontiers to settlement. They will also stimulate new industries. As the nation begins to knit itself together with all of these railroads, you need the properties, you need the materials to create the railroads. So the railroad will not only knit the country together and help make it easier to, or make transportation easier, and it will not only make it easier to sell products, but it will also stimulate other industries. Railroads are locomotives run on coal at this time. And so it will stimulate the coal mining industry because you need coal in order for the locomotives to run. It will also stimulate the iron industry because you need iron to build the locomotives and to build the rails. And so we really start to see one of the biggest importances or level points of importance or points of significance with the railroad is that it doesn't just make transportation easier, it actually stimulates other industries. The B&O Railroad, or the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad, was completed in 1828, and it was the nation's first commercial railroad. Another technological innovation at this time is the telegraph, which was invented by Samuel F.B. Morse, who I'm sure you've heard of by Morse code. So Morse code is a series of dot and dash combinations that represent letters in language. And so it makes instant communication possible. That is what the telegraph does. It makes instant communication possible through the use of Morse code. And the telegraph goes into commercial operation in 1844. Now, to show how quickly these innovations really crisscross the country, within 16 years, there are about 50,000 miles of telegraph wire strung throughout the United States. And by 1860, the railroad network had grown to about 30,000 miles, which was more than the total of the rest of the world combined. And so you see a lot of importance with the railroads. Now, one thing that will help the West, or at this time, you will also have a lot of people who will move west. So if you recall, last chapter, we talked about the Louisiana Purchase. The Louisiana Purchase will instantly double the size of the United States. And because of that, you'll have settlers who will flood into the West seeking land and a place of their own. Between 1790 and 1840, about 4.5 million people will move to the western portion of the United States. And few of these people will move as lone pioneers. That's just not how it worked back then. Because remember, they're not moving, many of them, to developed and established cities. On the contrary, they travel in groups and they would work with each other because they have to clear the land and prepare the land and establish their own communities from scratch. Now, one stream of migration that we'll discuss in this chapter is the stream of migration that will flow out of the South and create the new Cotton Kingdom, okay? And the states that we'll really focus on with the new Cotton Kingdom will be the states of Mississippi, Alabama, Louisiana, and Arkansas. But many other states in the Deep South will grow cotton. Now, the early Industrial Revolution really focused on factories that produced cotton textiles, okay? The early Industrial Revolution focused and centered mainly on factories that produced cotton textiles. So towards the middle of the chapter, we'll talk about mill girls and we'll talk about the development of the factory system. And in these factories, they are producing cotton textiles. But where do they get this cotton? Well, I'm glad you asked. They get it from the Deep South. Now, this early Industrial Revolution that is going to focus again on producing cotton textiles will generate an immense demand for cotton. Cotton is something that is, well, a lot of people don't realize is that cotton can be very, very tedious to really harvest, because it's not like you just pick the cotton and you get this nice clean piece of cotton that you would find, on a cotton ball, on a bag of cotton balls. No, cotton is a plant. And so, of course, when you're picking it, there's a lot of plant material and it's very, very labor intensive. In the video that you'll watch that's part of your module, an expert says that it took one person 10 hours to produce a usable pound of cotton. So it's incredibly labor intensive. 10 hours to produce a usable pound of cotton. In 1793, a young man by the name of Eli Whitney invents the cotton gin. So what is the cotton gin? The cotton gin is a machine that cleans the plant material and the seeds out of the cotton. It makes it a lot easier. It makes the process a lot quicker. So once you get the invention of the cotton gin in 1793, it will absolutely revolutionize American slavery, because you'll be able to both grow and sell cotton on a very, very large scale. So it revolutionizes American slavery. Now, by large scale, you're probably wondering, what are you talking about? Where are you getting? Give me some numbers. Show me some numbers. I will, absolutely. So in 1793, there were about 5 million pounds of cotton produced in the United States, okay? 1793, about 5 million pounds of cotton. By 1820, there was 170 million pounds of cotton produced that year. So you go from producing about 5 million pounds of cotton in a year to, by 1820, some 27 years later, you're able to produce 170 million pounds in a year. So that definitely revolutionizes American slavery, but it also creates another problem. So if we also go back to last chapter, we recall that after the Constitutional Convention, they put a clause, the founders put a clause in the Constitution that says they are going to wait 20 years, which will be 1808, to end the international slave trade. Now, a lot of you guys in your in your last quiz, seem to be a little confused by that. It's not ending slavery in 1808. They're just saying that we are no longer going to import African slaves from Africa, right, after 1808. But by this time, it's not even necessary, because even at this time, due to the rise of the Cotton Kingdom and how much money cotton is fetching, we'll get a second Middle Passage. Now, there won't be a passage from any ocean. Instead, the second Middle Passage refers to this shift of slaves being sold from older slave states, such as Virginia and Maryland and the Carolinas, to states in the Deep South that make up the Cotton Kingdom. Between 1800 and 1860, approximately 1 million enslaved people were sold to the Deep South. And they were sold typically, or brought down to the Deep South, in slave coffles. A slave coffle were groups of enslaved Africans that were chained together or chained to one another on forced marches to the Deep South. And the second Middle Passage, this huge cell of enslaved people from older slave states to states in the Deep South, led to the destruction of family ties. It led to the breakup of communities. But as you have learned in this class, slavery is not an institution that cared about these things, because they did not, laws even back in the 1600s and into the 1700s said that enslaved people were not to be treated as human. Instead, they were to be treated as property. And so destruction of family ties, breakup of communities comes along with the territory. Okay, we will pick back up with commercial farmers in part 2.